Welcome, everyone. Hello. Welcome to Founders Live Conversations. I am Nick Hughes. I'm the founder and CEO of Founders Live. And today we have a special guest with us, one of our winners, which we'll talk about. We have Melinda Yerka with us. How are you? Welcome to the conversation.
Thanks.
It's great to have you, Melinda. It's so fun. We love to talk with our winners from our Founders Live city level events. You are a recent winner at the Founders Live Reno event, which not only was the first one, it was a great launch event there in Reno, Nevada, as well as I was there. It was fun to be there, meet all of you all, and hear your pitch in person. So it was so cool. But congratulations on winning that. And we're going to hear your story. So thanks for joining us. And maybe first, feel free to just give us a little bit of background, introduce yourself, and share with everyone just a bit of background on yourself.
Sure. Well, I was actually born in California, but mostly raised in Minnesota. So I typically say I'm from Minnesota. That's where my mom's family has been. They've been farmers there for 5 or more generations. And so that's how I was really introduced into agriculture. And I started working in cornfields when I was 12. So I always joke that plant breeding was my first job and it'll be my last job, but I was an artist in between. So I actually originally went to college to be an artist, and then I ended up back in science anyway. So kind of a roundabout trip. And then now I'm living and working a lot in Nevada and California. So really a round trip sort of thing. I got my PhD in plant breeding and genetics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2011. And I've been working in sorghum breeding and genetics since 2012. And sorghum, for a lot of people who don't know, is, I kind of call it the African cousin of corn. So you could think of a corn plant. It looks very similar, except that it tends to be a little bit more heat and drought tolerant. It's a gluten-free grain. And my work at the University of Nevada, Reno, which is where I'm at right now as an associate professor, focuses on developing sorghum to replace other grain crops as a more climate smart alternative. So to replace like wheat or barley in baking or in gluten-free beer, for example. But we're also working on using it to replace corn as dairy food and feed. And the purpose of Yerka Seeds, which is why I was pitching in Reno, is to serve as the commercialization arm for the new varieties that I initially develop in my lab that are not quite ready for commercialization. There's like some extra work that needs to go into it. I had to develop a seed company to do that because I happen to be the only plant breeder of any species in Nevada.
Wow.
And so there was no other like private industry company that could take my plants and get them to market. So I literally had to set up the lab here, start teaching people what plant breeding is, start developing new crops. And then when it's time to get to market, I had to start a company to do that too. So I wear a lot of hats.
Look at that. And, that's a story in itself. And we're going to get there for sure. What it's very interesting, and I always love to ask the entrepreneurs that are pitching at our events, that win our events, why entrepreneurship? And you mentioned the commercialization side. You're clearly going in the direction of creating your own entity and your own company. What draws you to do that? Whether it's just practical, like just needed to do it, or you are personally drawn to going out on your own outside of the kind of university setting. So share with us what really draws you to entrepreneurship.
Well, first, for sure, it was just a necessity of getting my plants to market. So I wasn't somebody who wanted to necessarily be one of those ivory tower sort of academics who just publishes data. And, I wanted to make sure that the plants that I developed actually ended up on farms growing and doing what I hoped that they would do for farmers and for consumers. And so for sure, my main goal was just to get my plants out of my lab onto farms. But once I started working in the entrepreneurial community here in Reno, I participated in a generator accelerator program that is housed here on campus at it's the UNR Innovation Center, which is where I pitched, where I met you. Um, After I started getting involved in the entrepreneurial community, I felt a lot of kind of resonance, maybe is the right word, between myself and other entrepreneurs, because I suppose my decision to come to Nevada in the first place and do something completely new that nobody had ever done before, I guess maybe that was the early seeds of an entrepreneur in me. And it wasn't until I got involved in this community and learned about pitching and investors and, marketing and meeting a lot more people that I realized that it really is kind of a different mindset that I probably had all along, and I just didn't know it. So I guess, to make a long story short, I feel like there's a lot of similarities between going and taking a new academic position, doing something that hasn't been done before, and starting up a new company. So it's been kind of satisfying for me to not only be able to be a scientist, but also to have that part of me that was always there encouraged, and I didn't know it was there.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and you kind of you sit in that in between space. One question that maybe pops up is, what are maybe the stark differences, or if there is some friction between the two? Because I'm sure that they have some differences in terms of the scientist and being at a university, and then really the free market of entrepreneurship. It's a bit wild in our industry sometimes.
Yeah, some of the friction points, I think, just come with the technical challenges of spinning off from a university. So the managing the intellectual property is really tricky, and there's no canned strategy because every professor is a little bit different. So in order to make it in academia, you really have to have something that's really unique. It's just yours, and you have to be really clear, this is my intellectual property. And so then trying to take that to a commercial setting, then you have to be like, well, this is my intellectual property at the university, but this is my intellectual property in this new company that I'm going to start using all this data that I got from the university, right? And so there's a transition that's tricky, and it's not a canned process, and it requires a lot of thought. And that's why I think that the accelerator program was so helpful, because it really helped me figure out what that boundary would be for a plant breeder specifically.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we've interacted with other startups that basically spun out of a university, and the IP was had to go through that process of pulling it out, and it's not easy, and there's never like exact right answers. You have to kind of figure it out, and obviously work with lawyers and people that can help you. So good job on that, and I know it's not easy. Hey, let's shift to, so you pitched and presented and resulted in the winning pitch of Founders Live in Reno. It was so great. Share with us your just brief experience, and how did you discover us? Then you got chosen to pitch, but then preparing for the pitch, and that can be nerve-wracking. Maybe just walk through some of your experience of this.
Yeah, so I didn't know about your event until about 2 days ahead of time. So I'm not sure how that happened exactly. Probably I've just been super busy getting ready for planting this spring. The pitch event was pretty recent. And we also have a lot of grain samples that we grew last year that we're in the process of distributing to various food science companies and farmers around the country. So I think I was just kind of caught up in that, and I didn't see a lot of the social media announcements that went into it. And then somebody directly emailed me literally 2 days before, and they invited me to pitch. And at first I was like, oh, I have no time at all. But then as the date got a little bit closer, and it's now like 1 day, I was like, well, I was really productive today. I have an evening free. I'm always looking for ways to get out of my lab and, out of my head. And I thought it would just be fun. So I had recently, actually, one of the things I'd been working on was developing a pitch for Gates Ag One, which is an investor in startups for agricultural and ag tech sorts of things. So I already had kind of a canned thing sort of prepared, and all I had to do was figure out how to switch it to 99 seconds.
Not easy.
No, that was not easy.
Well, it's so great. And, I felt like, there was a variety of pitches there, and it was a quite entertaining group actually. And it was really fun to be there. I want to give a shout out to David Azell, who is our Founders Live Reno city leader. And, David has been many years with Founders Live, and he spent most of that in Dallas when he was living in Dallas. So David, last year moved to Reno and was like, hey, let's get it going. And so we finally launched in Reno, Nevada. It was just really great. So, and I had the pleasure of being there as I'm traveling through the United States currently right now. And it was really fun. And, I think my question would be, what in the end, what value, you obviously it was kind of a last minute thing, but you made those decisions. And sometimes those split decisions can put us on an even more incredible path. You chose to be there. You chose to pitch. If you could speak to anyone, other founders, like why should they maybe say, you know what, I know I'm busy, but I can take a night out of my week and show up and pitch at Founders Live. If you could summarize, why you think it's in U1 and all that stuff, why should people maybe follow that path?
Well, something I was really impressed by is how you guys have a really global network of founders, and you're really interested in encouraging people to just like get together and make connections. And I think that it can't be understated how important it is for people who are just starting a company to get exposed to as many different people as they can. You just never know who you're going to be talking to, who you're going to meet someplace, and the different perspectives they have. You end up with collaborations you would have never anticipated, but also you're able to just plug into this network. Like you guys have like an actual network of people and people who provide services to founders who win. And all of that is, I think, just really important to getting off the ground and getting your feet kind of into that world for the first time.
Yeah, well, thank you. And you heard it here, everyone. That's we got a network. We do have, it's a global ecosystem, and whether you're in Reno or you're in Seoul, South Korea, it's a value to get plugged into our ecosystem. And as you mentioned, you never know who's going to be at these events, and that's true with, you never know how your information is going to flow through Founders Live and maybe reach someone in potentially Africa, which we're gonna talk a little bit about that in a second. But so amazing. When you were I always love to get just a quick pitch, a tip, and you obviously had to squeeze it into that 99 seconds. That's not easy. What did you find valuable that helped you end up resonating with the audience and winning? Is there anything that comes to mind that you at least, made, when you were with your slides, you're like, I'm going to keep that, and then this I'm going to remove. What maybe could you share with people that are thinking about pitching?
Wow, that's a tough one because I agonized over how in the world to do this in such a short time. I think I started from the position of it's just not possible. There's no way I can fit in everything I'd like to fit in. So if it's not possible to fit it all in, what's the minimum thing that I want people to come away with? And I knew that folks needed to know that I had developed some new varieties of sorghum, and they needed to know that I'm using some very cutting edge technologies to continue forward with what I'm working on. And they needed to know that we're working in a space that nobody else occupies. And I'm sure we're going to get into that later in the conversation, but we're working on finding ways to prevent gene flow from crops to wild relatives, to adapt new crop varieties to new areas of the world rapidly and efficiently. And so those are pretty unique spaces. And I just already talked about it in less than 99 seconds. So you start with what's impossible, and then you figure out what the minimum sound bites are.
Yeah, whether you use the word impossible or not, I think you're absolutely right. It's like, look, and we have founders that have a 30 slide investor deck, and that might be great for the half an hour meeting that you're going to have with investors, because that's needed, but this is Founders Live. There's 99 seconds, and yes, it is impossible to fit all of those messages or whatever you're going to say on all these slides. So you did the right thing, which is you kind of narrowed it down to the essence. And the way that we explain this is your job as the founder, as a founder of a company, no matter if it's Founders Live or not, your job is to educate the audience or the people watching, listening, attending an event or whatever, your value, the value of the company and the thing that you've created. And you break that down into, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's why it matters in the world. And I think you did that. And then you explained, like, here's what we're doing. We've got some new varieties and things coming out and all that stuff. And, I would say, quite honestly, I believe that your authenticity shone through as well. And you know what I mean? And you're right. And what does that mean? That means, like, you're not sitting here on the stage, not that this is not great, but you're not sitting here pitching something that you're going to make $1 billion and do all this stuff. And, like, that sometimes doesn't come across. And I think by saying, you can tell you very much care about not only, seeds and the food, essentially the plants and the food that we're ingesting, and we want to improve the world, the climate, all of this stuff. You can tell that you have been doing this for quite a while, and it came across. And so I think with the Founders Live pitch, you can't forget that your passion and your desire to improve the world in this way is one of the things you need to lean on, in addition to, here's what we're doing, here's the data, here's the result, here's where we're going, that sort of thing. And here's our business model. So I think you did a great job.
Thanks. And I think that the other thing that was helpful that I spent a lot of time considering is I brought in actual sorghum panicles so people could see what it looks like.
You did.
I think that's a big thing. A lot of people just don't know what the plants look like that their food comes from. So when I said I have new varieties of grain crops, like, what would that mean if I didn't have the actual prop right there?
Another great idea is, having something tangible is very, very helpful. And I remember you put it front and center. It was like, boom, it was right,
yep.
right there. Great.
I have 99 seconds.
You don't have a lot of time. Well, let's get into that. Okay, so Yerka Seeds, and feel free to give a little background here. Don't need to go directly into that pitch, but what is Yerka Seeds? And you're mentioning these plants and whatnot. Why is it important for us to know not only what you're building, but, like, even the plants that then result in the food that we're eating, the grains that end up in our food? So let's just go through it.
Yeah. Well, I think what's unique about Yerka Seeds is, there's plenty of companies that can sell farmers seeds to plant and grow and that are useful and helpful. But we kind of take it a step further than that. And we're really focused on the question of, how do you adapt a new species to a new location with minimal infrastructure, like I had in Nevada when I first came here, and make it a high value crop, in the shortest period of time possible. And so we really are kind of the merger of plant genetics and plant breeding, plus a bunch of data science, a lot of computational sorts of stuff, a lot of physiology, a lot of biology goes into this. And so we really have this very comprehensive data framework to basically help us identify which genes in the plants we need in which environments, so that we can develop crops that are going to use less water, they're going to be heat and drought tolerant, they're going to be resilient to any kind of changes in the climate and the local environment, and as fast as possible. So it's really a framework. Instead of just specifically the varieties, it's really the framework plus the varieties for rapid adaptation to new environments.
Well, this is very, very important. Our world is changing. The climate is drastically affected, and that obviously affects the ability for things to grow, where they can grow, all, like, just obviously all that stuff. And so is that maybe dive into your why, like
Yeah.
why do this and what are we looking at in the next kind of couple decades if things like this aren't created.
Yeah. So the big picture here is if you look at a number of like Precision Business Insights, there's some articles you can look up online. They've got reports that talk about various sectors of the marketplace. And if you look up things like gluten-free grains or malting and brewing or specialty flours, these are things that are pretty important to the food supply. And especially with the increased interest in gluten-free foods over the years, this is really important. Um, and the situation is that historically, we have adapted barley to these parts of the world. We've adapted wheat to these parts of the world. Corn goes here, sorghum goes there, pearl millet goes here. But the problem is that the way that weather patterns are changing doesn't care about any of what doesn't care what people have done. It just doesn't care. And if we just stay in our little silos, the wheat people work with the wheat people and the sorghum people work with the sorghum people, and if we just stay in our silos and we stay within the regions within which we've already established our existing breeding programs, we're not going to solve the problem of what happens when this area gets too hot and dry for barley. What are the farmers there going to do?
Yeah.
Unless there's been a plant breeder working in that area to design some new crop that has similar properties, what are the farmers going to do? And so, like, I think in the news and in the scientific literature, you can read, for as long as you want about all the problems and the threats of climate change, but what are you going to do? And that's the space that I occupy, because I'm actually going into places where nobody has grown sorghum before, where we know that, the barley or the wheat is having a hard time keeping up, where the corn is having a hard time keeping up. And I put new kinds of sorghum there that have similar traits, similar like grain chemistry, for example, that can serve similar functions. And that's what the farmers can do. It's something we can actually do.
Yeah, it's so important. Like you just touched on it. Excuse me. And that's the thing is, how do we expand the availability for where this is able to be grown? And let's talk about that. So in your pitch, you talked about I believe it was Kenya and some other parts. So describe kind of some of the innovative places or the new places that you've taken this, that you have the growing happening, or it's you're bringing it to different parts of the world. Like talk a little bit about where it's available and what maybe you're thinking over the course of the future.
Yeah, so the kind of core of what I do is developing new, what I would call a panel. Geneticists would call it a mapping population, but it's basically a panel of varieties, and they have a range of adaptation traits. So that means the plants have a bit of plasticity. They can grow taller, they can grow shorter, they can mature at different times. And so what this does is it allows us to just put this panel of plants anywhere we want in the world and to identify the ones that are going to do the best in that region. It's a little more complicated than that, but we don't need to go into advanced genetics and your podcast and put all of your viewers to sleep. The point is that I have a collaboration with an international center called the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. The acronym is SIMMYT, SIMMYT. And they are based in Nairobi, Kenya. And they are very active in working with plant breeding projects for underserved populations throughout the world, but the office in Nairobi specifically emphasizes sub-Saharan Africa. So I've given them my panel. We're working on it together to fully develop it and characterize it genetically and physiologically. We're also using it to increase the seed availability so that we can distribute seed from this panel throughout sub-Saharan Africa and quickly identify varieties that are well adapted to all of the different, ecosystems throughout that massive area. And what's great about working with SIMMYT is that they have already existing partnerships with many of the national governments. And so they already have an established relationship with local people. And so it just makes the whole distribution of these varieties very streamlined. Like all the seeds and the varieties and the data can all go together in a very quick way throughout this region.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. And where, in terms of the tent, let's just kind of even say, like, where do you imagine Yerka Seeds going in 10 years, whether it's, various different parts of the world kind of doing the same thing you're doing there in sub-Saharan Africa, or just share with us a little bit of where you want to see Yerka Seeds and this company really going, the impact.
Yeah, so I've talked about how the plants can be adapted to different areas, and I've spoken a little bit about how they have high quality traits, but I think now is the time I should specify it's not just for like malting and brewing, it's not just for baking. We do have grain that has better qualities for all of those things, but we also have some of the highest protein contents that have ever been observed in sorghum, some of the largest seeds that are easier for like cows to chew and crush in their teeth, so they're more digestible. So the higher protein contents, the more digestible starches, that's going to be really impactful in places where there's human and animal malnutrition. So that's why we're especially targeting sub-Saharan Africa. So my goal over the next 10 years is to really establish the company, get the plant varieties and all of the data and computational stuff that goes with them that basically streamlines the process of getting them onto farms. Get that system really characterized and really working efficiently, get people trained on how to use these specific varieties and this kind of data. And then like all startups, I'm looking to sell. I'll sell everything to an institution, probably like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or something that I know is going to use it, and something that has its heart in the right place of not just trying to make a lot of money off it, but make sure that it's actually impactful, because that really goes down to my philosophy. It's not here to make $1 billion. It's here to be logistically impactful. Again, I'm a professor. I have tenure. I could just sit in my ivory tower and publish papers. But here I am working ridiculous amounts of time getting seeds onto farms. So,
well, and you're doing that for maybe a specific reason. And can you put words to like why? And this is a little bit of a meta question, but you could be just sitting there, just kind of doing your thing at the university, and that's fine. But you've chosen not to. What is tugging at you that that this is the thing you need to do? You feel you need to do it, and why? I mean, that's kind of an interesting question.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, you're an entrepreneur, so maybe you could tell me if this is something you feel. But you know how you feel like you've got more gas in the tank, and you haven't hit the ceiling yet. And
Yes.
you get older. I mean, and you start to get into middle life, and you're like, well, what are the things I want to get done before it's time to retire? And especially in the research field, a grant that I would write would be, it's a 5-year project. So if you figure how many 5-year increments I've got left in my career before it's time to retire, it's really not that many. And so then you have to be really deliberate. What are the things that I need to get out there? How can I make sure I get as close to the ceiling of my capacity as I possibly can before, I have to give up. Well, maybe not give up, but maybe transition to consulting is really what I think in the long run.
Well, yeah, that's well said, and maybe I'll say it slightly differently, which is, I do feel that there is some of us in life that are kind of tapped on the shoulder, or kind of at least somehow we're feeling this. There's another thing. There's further, and it feels like that you answer that in your way, and maybe it's just like, look, we can't not do it, and
Yeah.
I'm the same way with Founders Live. I just saw something that I firmly believe. I see for sure. That's why I travel around the world. I will be in Nairobi, Kenya next year. I'm very excited about that. But went through Europe last year and South America the year before, and I visit these cities, meet the people, so that I can really understand that there are all these people around the world. They want to build, they want to create, they want to fix things, and they're not being supported. They're not receiving the sufficient resources, support, and really the exposure to grow and get what they need to move forward. And so like I can't not try to fix that at least. And so that's it's a similar thing. It's a hard thing to describe, but the ones that go do it and say that's a problem, I'm going to spend at least some time of my life to go pursue it and bring a solution to the table, and hopefully it's impactful. It's a great life. We greatly appreciate the people that choose to really answer that call when they're tapped.
Yeah, I think that's really well put, because I think from what I've seen in the entrepreneurial community, it's a lot of people who are just natural problem solvers. And you see like a gap, and you just you have to do something about it. And that's definitely my experience too. I mean, it's a similarity between starting up an academic lab. You have to distinguish yourself somehow, so you have to like really find something that is going to be impactful. And so that's, I think, a similarity between being an academic and an entrepreneur. But yeah. I think the difference with an entrepreneur is that you're a little less risk averse. I think you're a little more likely to kind of take a step in the darkness and meet new people. Maybe academics are just a little too introverted for that. I don't know. I'm kind of like right on the line. So
yeah. Well, yeah. Less risk averse, definitely, and and we're going to get into actually a few lessons and advice that you have here, but that's a short one for me. Is that understanding there's certain risks that are healthy to take, and when we take those, actually good things happen, or we learn, and that's fine. Being in a position of, okay, I'm gonna take a risk here, and maybe the company grows and there's some real great potential and prosperity. But if not, you still learn something, and that's never a bad thing. So taking some risks. But let's get into how about some lessons learned and advice for other founders. And you do stand in a very unique, it's as you mentioned, you're kind of in between there in some ways. Let's go with like two things, maybe two pieces of thoughts, advice that you've learned that if you would share with other early stage entrepreneurs. And it could be, anything that comes to mind. But what have you learned thus far that you would want to pass on to someone that's just getting started?
This is a tough one for me. So for your audience, I didn't know what banners were going to come up. So this is a tough one for me because, well, let me first flesh out the question. When you say advice to founders, do you mean founders in general, or like founders in my field, or university people? Because in my mind, those are three very different classes.
Yeah. It's probably best, kind of general founders, they might not even be in the United States. So people that have chosen to go in and build and kind of pursue their vision, simply what we were just talking about previously. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing is to just tap into your local community. Like if there's a community of founders around you, like I didn't know there was such a big entrepreneurial community here in Reno. It turns out there is. So I think first is just find a community. And I think the second thing is just to get really comfortable talking about your ideas. Like you were saying just a moment ago, like either you're going to go further or you're going to learn something. So there's really no failure. Just getting out and talking about your ideas. And learning how to pitch appropriately is a really, it's an art and a science, and you wouldn't necessarily expect it's as difficult to learn as it is. But getting that down is just so important because it really does open doors. It gets you in front of investors faster. It gets you funded faster. It makes you more confident. And I think that the last thing I would say, point number 3, is that you should be a little fearless. Like if you're feeling like, I'm just nervous about these things, I think you have to kind of steel yourself. That if I'm going to be a founder, I need to be able to find fearlessness at some point, right? So I don't want to say that you have to be a fearless person, because I don't think that way. I think that we can choose to be what we need to be in the moment, right? And so if you're at a point in your life where you've got that problem in front of you, and you need to get in there and you need to get your hands dirty and solve it, then I think you can choose fearlessness, even if you're a very shy person.
Yeah, those are all really great. Thank you. And for you listening or watching, absolutely, follow those points. And I think the fearless is absolutely like, I don't know any business owner or entrepreneur founder that you can point to that has any level of success that didn't exercise that muscle of fearlessness.
Yeah, the muscle. That's yeah.
You're right. It's a muscle kind of, and even if they were like, okay, I'm a little scared, but you kind of pull that out and be that fearlessness. And what happens is you just learn some of these skills. And as you mentioned, the pitching and, understanding that all of a sudden, so your first times might feel a little uncomfortable or a little nerve wracking, but pretty quickly it just starts to flow because you exercise and use that muscle of fearlessness. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. I mean, even like in my case, like I public speak all the time, because I teach classes and so on like that. But for me to learn how to pitch was quite challenging because I always wanted to give my lecture. So I had to like completely adjust how I do things.
Oh, that's so good. Well, Melinda, very, very exciting. And, obviously we would want to follow along and see this develop. One last thing I did mention, when I was there, I plan on, I'm going to be traveling all through Africa next year. And I will be in Nairobi, Kenya for a week. I will be in a variety of different countries. So I will make sure that the information when I'm there. And there's a possibility to at least, maybe connect some dots in some other cities and countries. So, please think about that and remember that. And if there's any way that I can help or at least like raise this awareness to whoever might be a good contact for you to connect with them locally in those cities or countries, I would be more than willing to at least, make a connection.
Yeah, and it's certainly any like foodpreneurs, people who are interested in developing like ancient grains, um, some traditional food quality traits that have been lost through colonialization. We have a lot of those things.
Good. Well,
So,
very good.
great.
All right. So for people to learn more, you've requested to just, hey, point to LinkedIn. It's Melinda Yerka on LinkedIn. Yes. Any other
Yep.
special things that you want them to know?
No, we're in the process of developing a website. It will be yerkaseeds.com, but it's not quite live yet.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that you'll have information on LinkedIn on that once it's
I will.
available. So very good. Well, Melinda, so great. Congratulations again. And all of this proves that through Founders Live, not we showcase entrepreneurs of various industries and various stages. But this one you won, and I think the message is like we have some work to do because the world is changing. As you said, it does not care. We have to shift in how we're going to make sure that the correct grains, food, and nutrition is available to everyone around the world. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, you know what, everyone, thank you so much. I'm Nick Hughes. I'm the founder and CEO of Founders Live, and this has been Founders Live Conversations. Keep watching, keep listening. Feel free to go check out, founderslive.com. If you haven't, follow us on the social channels as well. And until next time, everyone, enjoy your day. Thank you.